Morning, students. Welcome to part 2 of lesson 7.5. Today we're going to talk about going from a decimal to a percent and then a percent back to a decimal. Now, as we start this lesson, one thing I want you to notice is how percents, fractions, and decimals are actually all connected. So if I take a look at this sort of like triangular chart, I can take a number that's a percent and I can make it a fraction, and then I can take that fraction and I can make it a decimal, and then I can take that decimal and I can make it a percent. But I could also go the opposite way. I could start with a percent, and then I could go down to decimal, across to fraction, and back to percent. So anytime you have any number, let's say it's a percent, you can go to decimal or fraction. But if I have a decimal, I can also go to percent or fraction. So really, decimal, percent, and fraction are just 3 different ways of writing the same thing over. It's 3 different ways of representing information. Sometimes it's helpful to have something as a fraction, but then maybe it's more helpful to change it into a percent. For example, if you're looking about how you did on a test or a quiz, you might actually want to know the percent every time so you can sort of see on average how you're doing. So let's take a look at decimal to percent. So here I have a decimal. We all love to say 0.5. I like to say that too, especially when we're marking. But really, we would read this decimal as 0 and 5/10. Now, really, going from decimal to percent is pretty straightforward. The only thing you need to remember is when I want to go from a decimal to a percent, all I need to do is times by 100. So if I have 0.5 or 0 and 5/10, all I need to do is actually multiply it by 100. When you multiply by 100, you really, what you're doing, let's say I have my 0.5 here. If I multiply by 10, I move my decimal over to the right once, and then I move it over to the right again, and I place a 0. So what I actually end up with is 50%. So that makes sense, because if you think about it, if I think about 1.0 as equaling 100%, it makes sense that 0 and 5/10 equals half of that, 50%. But now what we can also do is we can take a look at how fractions are connected. So if I take a look at my original 0 and 5/10, you should hear the fraction as I say it, right? I said 0 and 5/10. Now, if you remember the lesson that you did yesterday, if I want to take a fraction and make it into a percent, I think, well, what is it out of 100? What did I do to the 10 to get to 100? I multiplied by 10, which do the bottom, you must do to the top. And I get the same thing, 50 out of 100, which is 50%. Now, grade 7, clearly I'm not going to make you do this every time. I just want you to show why it works to multiply 100 by 100. So if you go from a decimal to a percent, you multiply by 100. So again, let's just do that a couple times. So here I have 2 and 42 hundredths. So I'm going to multiply by 100. But if you want, I'm just going to pick a different color so you can see. When we multiply by 100, we bump our decimal place once and then twice. So my final answer is 242. 242 what? And this is very important. Don't forget your percent sign, please. 242%. So we're just going to do a bunch of examples so we get the hang of it. Oops, come on, iPad. All right, here we go. So here we have again, it's good practice to say it properly, 0 and 7/100. Now, we can multiply 100, bump my decimal twice, and I get 7 what? 7%. But here's another thing, grade 7. If you go back and you say this as a fraction, 0, or as a decimal, 0 and 7/100, we should easily be able to recognize that 7/100 equals 7%, right? Because a percent is really just saying an amount out of 100. So it doesn't matter to me which way you do it. If you go times 100 or if you like to put it in a fraction, that's fine. All right, let's take a look at one more. We're moving from decimal to percent. So here we have 0 and 4 thousandths. So I just want you to see that. But again, we can still multiply by 100, but I'm moving my decimal place over twice. So now look, now I have 0 and 4/10 of a percent. Now what I wanted to point out here, grade 7, is look, I still have a decimal in my percent. That's not the same as starting with an original decimal number, because this is just a regular old number, 0 and 4/100ths, where this is a percent. It's represented out of 100, but I still can have a decimal in it because it's less than 1%. So again, I might say, 1 out of every 100 people hate pizza. But then maybe I'd say, 0 and 0.4% of people hate brownies. It's less than 1 out of every 100 people. So when you have a decimal in your percent, that's okay. You're done. Because last year I had students that would go, oh no, I have a decimal in my percent. And they would multiply by 100 again. Don't do that. Once you've multiplied by 100, even if you have a decimal left, that's okay. It's still in percent form. It's representing out of 100. Okay, so let's go backwards. So now we're going to go percent to decimal. So if you're thinking about it, before when we went decimal to percent, we multiplied by 100. So now if I want to go percent to decimal, I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to divide by 100. So percent to decimal, we divide by 100. So here I have 30%. I divide by 100. When I divide, I'm moving my decimal place to the left. Divide by 10, divide by 100, and I get 0 and 3/10. Now again, if you like to think of that as a different way, that's fine. Look, you can think, okay, 30%, that's 30 out of 100, which I can simplify to 3/10, and I should be able to think 3/10. I can write that as 0 and 3/10. Again, whichever way works for you. So here we have another one. I'm going to divide by 100. Move your decimal place over to the left once and then twice to represent those 2 zeros. But in this case, I need to put in a 0 after the decimal to hold place value, and I get 0 and 2/100ths. Or I think 2% is the same as 2 out of 100, which is 0 and 2/100ths. So you have to really know these place values: tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Right, here we have one where it's greater than 100%, but we can still follow the same steps. We divide by 100. 1, 2, I get the decimal 4 and 21/100ths. All right, let's do one more. Remember I said it's okay to have a percent in your decimal, but that does not mean that this is a decimal number. I still need to convert it to a decimal number because that percent sign is there. So it means I have less than 1%, but I want to put it in an actual decimal. So I'm still going to divide by 100. I'm going to move my decimal to the place to the left once and then twice. Wherever that decimal stops, you put a 0 in front, and then I'm actually putting another 0 in here. So I get 0, 0, 4. 0 and 4 thousandths. Again, if I wanted to, this 0.4%, I can know that that's 4 1,000ths. So main takeaway grade 7, if I go back to this, is understand that percents, fractions, and decimals are all interconnected. So if I give you a number like 0 and 8/10ths, you should be able to put that in a percent, and you should be able to put that in a fraction. You have to see how they're all interconnected, because that's going to become more and more important as we go on this unit. All right, message me if you have any questions, and I hope you have a great Tuesday.